Desire was no longer the problem. Now it was jealousy, pride, and the terrifying possibility that they could hurt each other for real. For 3 days after Brooklyn, Gabrielle Delaney became exquisitely professional. This was, I should clarify, a form of cruelty. Not obvious cruelty. Nothing so crude as silence or avoidance or some dramatic act of retreat I could have taken offense to in clean, useful terms. No. Gabi was too intelligent for that. She replied to emails on time. She attended meetings. She spoke to me in public with the calm, polished courtesy of a woman who understood that the most effective way to wound a person is to leave them no scene to object to. She became impeccable. After Brooklyn, that felt obscene. On Monday morning, she sent a 2-line note about a revised donor brief. Attached is the updated language for Thursday's review. Let me know if you need anything else. Anything else. As if I had not had my hand under her sweater 2 days earlier. As if she had not been in my lap shaking apart one honest breath at a time. As if I had not stood in that borrowed Brooklyn apartment and let her leave because it was the right thing to do and because, for once in my life, I had wanted the right thing more than the immediate one. I read the email twice, then once more for the pleasure of resenting punctuation. Mara stepped into my office while I was still staring at it. "Should I come back?" she asked. "No," I said, closing the screen. "Unless you've developed useful emotional sabotage overnight." She looked at me carefully. "Is this about the foundation language?" "It is about many things," I said. "One of them has bullet points." Mara set a folder on my desk. "Naomi called." "Of course she did." She said, and I quote, "Check whether she's pretending to be fine in silk again." I leaned back in my chair. I need to stop surrounding myself with women who know me. That seems difficult to arrange at your age. I looked at her. Mara didn't blink. "I do appreciate competence." By noon I had survived 2 board calls, 1 donor update, and a conversation with a man from development who used the phrase emotionally resonant scale without irony. At 1:15 I went downstairs for the foundation review and found Gabi already seated near the windows, glasses on, dark hair pinned back, a pen resting lightly between her fingers. She looked up as I came in. No hitch in her breath. No visible shift. No sign whatsoever that we had ever been alone in a room built for honesty. "Taylor," she said. That was all. My name, clean and neutral and professionally placed. It should not have hurt as much as it did. "Gabrielle." I sat 3 chairs away because I have standards and because if I had sat closer I would have looked exactly as affected as I was. Gabi turned 1 page in her packet and went back to discussing grant allocations with the museum liaison beside her. It was almost admirable. Almost. The thing people misunderstand about women like me is that they think we're protected by fluency. That because I can say the right thing in any room, charm the right donor, calm the right ego, redirect the right conversation, I must therefore move through emotional difficulty with the same graceful immunity. I don't. I just usually have time to hide it better than most. By the end of that meeting, I had contributed exactly what was required of me, thanked 2 people I did not care about, and not looked at Gabi nearly as often as my body wanted to. This is what growth looks like when it's deeply irritating. Naomi called me the second I got back upstairs. "You sound murderous," she said without preamble. "I'm not murderous. You're doing that careful voice. The one you use when someone has earned the right to actually hurt you and you hate them for the inconvenience." I stood at the window in my office and looked out at the city. "Do you know what she wrote to me this morning?" Naomi's pause was delighted. "Oh no. Let me know if you need anything else." Naomi inhaled sharply, scandalized on my behalf. "That's vicious." "Thank you." "No, that is genuinely elegant." "I'm impressed." "I'm hanging up." "Don't." "I care about you." "You care about narrative structure." "That too," Naomi admitted. "What are you going to do?" I watched a silver cloud drag its reflection across the glass of the building opposite mine. "Nothing." Naomi was quiet for a second. Then, very softly, "That may be the saddest answer you've ever given me. I did nothing on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I did nothing more intensely. This is not as easy as it sounds. Doing nothing when you are Taylor Ashford is not passive. It is an active, disciplined, nearly athletic decision not to solve a feeling by arranging the room around it. I did not send flowers. I did not find a reason to stop by her office. I did not manufacture a meeting, a question, a strategic overlap, or an emergency that could plausibly require her input in my presence. I answered one email with 8 words and no softness whatsoever. She responded with 6. We were, in every practical sense, very close to being adults. By Thursday evening, I was in no mood for the museum benefit and had still agreed to attend because some obligations are built into bone long before they become calendar entries. The event was for one of our major restoration partnerships downtown. Donors, curators, trustees, the usual expensive convergence of culture and capital pretending to like one another for noble reasons. Naomi arrived at my apartment while I was fastening an earring. "You look dangerous," she said from the doorway. "I feel homicidal." "Chic." She stepped inside and kissed my cheek. "Which direction is the problem pointing tonight?" Foundation invited Gabi. Naomi's brows rose. And I intend to behave beautifully, which is how you know things are bad." She took in the black silk, the bare line of my shoulders, the diamonds small enough to be indecent, and gave a satisfied nod. "You do, in fact, look like a woman who has decided to be magnanimous in the face of emotional collapse. That may be the kindest thing you've ever said to me." "It isn't kind. It's warning." I picked up my clutch from the table. "I'm not going to make a scene." "I know." Naomi linked her arm through mine as we crossed the foyer. "That's the concern." The museum was glowing by the time we arrived. Marble, glass, and the sort of candlelight that exists primarily to flatter money. The front gallery had been opened for the reception. The restored canvases lit in quiet pools, strings moving somewhere behind the walls with just enough restraint not to suggest weddings or funerals. I walked in and became, as I so often do, instantly useful. A trustee wanted reassurance about a donor family. A museum director wanted a photograph. A councilwoman wanted a joke before the press line. An older patron wanted to tell me I looked like my mother if my mother had ever learned charm, which was both insulting and not entirely inaccurate. I smiled. I listened. I touched an elbow here, a wrist there, leaned in at the right moment, gave one woman my full attention long enough for her to blush, and one elderly philanthropist my hand long enough for him to remember his own importance and calm down. This is what I do. This is what I have always done. Warmth, correctly administered, is the most efficient form of power I know. By the time I caught sight of Gabi at the far end of the main hall, she had already seen enough. I knew it immediately. You develop an eye for these things when you have spent years being watched by people who think they are hiding it well. She stood near the sculpture gallery entrance in dark wine silk and black trousers, one hand at her side, the other holding a champagne glass she had barely touched. Beside her, one of the younger curators was saying something earnest and forgettable. Gabi's attention was on him. Her eyes, however, had gone flat. Not angry. Worse. Measured. That look hit me somewhere low and mean. Because I knew exactly what she had seen. Not a woman flirting with one person. A woman fluent with everyone. A woman who knew how to make the room soften around her on command. A woman who could, from a distance, look like she belonged to no one because everyone in sight had once felt slightly chosen by her. Naomi, standing at my shoulder as if the universe had assigned her permanent witness status, followed my gaze and went very quiet. "Oh," she murmured. "She's having a terrible time." I didn't look at Naomi. "Don't enjoy this." "I'm not." A pause. "That was a lie." "I'm enjoying it a little. But only because you both deserve to suffer before the breakthrough." That's a monstrous sentence. It's a mature one. Across the room, the donor I had been speaking with, a beautiful woman from the theater board with extraordinary shoulders and terrible romantic judgment, touched my forearm lightly as she laughed at something I'd said. I had not even noticed doing the thing until I saw Gabi notice it. Her mouth hardened. Barely. A fraction. Enough. And then, because apparently the gods of emotional humiliation had decided I was not yet sufficiently tested, David Lang appeared beside her. Of course he did. If there is a patron saint of ill-timed men in well-cut suits, David had long since lit a candle at that altar. He stepped into Gabi's line of sight carrying 2 drinks, said something low enough that I couldn't hear it, and offered her one. She took it with a small nod. Not warmly. Not intimately. But she took it. My jaw tightened before I could stop it. Naomi's voice at my shoulder was very dry. That reaction remains completely healthy. I dislike him. You dislike gravity if it stands too close to her. That's absurd. Naomi turned and looked at me fully. No, sweetheart. What's absurd is that she's watching you be Taylor Ashford with everyone in the room, and you're surprised it might hurt her. That landed exactly where it should have. Because of course it hurt her. Because of course that was the fear. Not that I wanted her. That I wanted her in the same language I might use for anyone else, and expected her to hear a different meaning without proof. I looked back toward Gabi. She wasn't watching me anymore. That hurt too. If you're listening from somewhere far more peaceful than this room, tell me where. I envy you already. And if you're enjoying the story, like the video and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than people think, and at this point Naomi would consider it a personal betrayal if I failed to mention that. The first hour of the evening was a study in mutual punishment. I stayed occupied because that is what I do best when I'm angry enough to be elegant. Gabi stayed distant because that is what she does best when wanting something starts to feel like a threat. We circled each other through 4 galleries and 2 donor conversations without once being alone. At one point, I found myself speaking to the chair of the restoration committee while an art consultant in silver leaned too close to my shoulder. I moved half a step away from the consultant and made a note to stop touching people so much when I talked. At another point, I watched David bend his head toward Gabi as they stood near a Roman bust no one in the room cared about except financially. He said something. She answered. He smiled. She did not. That should have calmed me. Instead, it enraged me differently. Because it meant she wasn't leaning on him for comfort. She was using him as structure. Distance with a pulse. And I was not entirely sure whether she knew how cruel that felt from where I stood. By 9:30 I had had enough of grace. I found her alone first. Not because I engineered it, though I could have, but because there is a moment in every event when the room disperses just enough for people who are in trouble to locate one another as if by instinct. The side gallery off the restoration wing was almost empty, the crowd still clustered around the donor remarks in the main hall. Gabi stood near one of the tall windows, backlit by city light, her untouched second drink in hand. When she heard my steps, she didn't turn immediately. Interesting. I stopped beside her and looked out at the dark glass towers beyond the museum. You're very committed tonight, I said, to making me want to set a lawyer on fire. That sounds extreme. It's proportionate. Only then did she look at me. Up close, her composure was visibly expensive. You seem to be managing your evening well enough, she said. The room certainly thinks so. There it was. I let out one short breath through my nose. If this is about the curator from theater, it isn't. Good. Because I don't even remember her name. That was meant to lighten it. It didn't. Gabi's face did something small and painful. That's not helping. I turned toward her fully then. What exactly do you think you saw? Her laugh was quiet and humorless. Taylor. No. Tell me. She stared at me for a second, then set her glass down on the sill with careful precision. I saw a woman who can walk into a room and make 5 people feel singular before the first speech. Her voice stayed calm. Too calm. I saw a woman who touches an arm, leans in, remembers a detail, smiles at exactly the right second, and leaves a trail of people feeling more alive because she looked at them properly. That isn't a crime. No, her eyes held mine. It's a gift. Something in her face sharpened. It's also exactly why I don't know what to trust. The words sat between us like glass. I could have denied it. Could have softened it, turned self-aware, made a joke about my fatal public charm, and hoped she would forgive me for being essentially impossible. Instead I said, very quietly, you think what happened in Brooklyn was just that? Her breath changed, just once. I think, she said carefully, that you were very good at making a woman feel like the only person in the room. You were. Her eyes flashed. That is not the same answer. The old version of me would have moved closer then and weaponized intimacy. The current version was getting very tired of old versions. Fine, I said. You want the truth? I would love a version of the truth that isn't wrapped in confidence. That one hit. Good. Because I was beginning to tire of being the only one bleeding visibly from this conversation. The truth, I said, is that yes, I know what I do to people in rooms like this. I know exactly how it looks. I know how often I make warmth look effortless because it's easier than letting anyone see the cost of it. I held her gaze. The truth is also that none of that has anything to do with what happened in Brooklyn. Gabi didn't move. How am I supposed to know that? She asked. That should have been a fair question. Instead, after the week I'd had, it felt like a blade. Because I stopped. The words came out sharper than I intended. Gabi blinked once. I didn't stop. Because I let you leave. Because I've spent 6 days not coming after you every time you turn into a memo with a pulse. Because I am standing here right now trying not to sound like every instinct I have is telling me to drag you out of this room and ask what exactly I'm being punished for. Color rose high along her cheekbones. You think I'm punishing you? I think you've spent the last week acting like you're the only one in danger. The silence that followed had teeth. Gabi's chin lifted slightly. Defensive now. Hurt now. Good. At least we were finally in the same room emotionally. I am in danger, she said. And I'm not. That landed. Not hard enough. So I stepped closer. Do you know what the worst part is? I asked, voice low. You keep looking at me as if my feelings must be less real because I'm better at carrying them. As if being older, richer, more practiced somehow means I don't get to be hurt by you treating every step forward like something you're going to regret in advance. Gabi's lips parted. I could see the moment she realized where she had been aiming and where she'd actually hit. But I was too far in it now. You don't get to keep treating me like I can't bleed, I said softly, just because I usually don't let people see it. Something in her face broke. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. Just enough. I turned away first because if I kept looking at her, I might have said something softer than I meant, and I was not yet ready to forgive either of us. Behind us, a burst of applause rose faintly from the main hall. Somewhere, a donor was being thanked for generosity with more sincerity than the tax code required. The world, offensively, continued. When Gabi spoke again, her voice was lower. That's not what I meant. No, I said without turning back. It's just what you did. I heard her step closer. Taylor. I closed my eyes briefly. Her hand touched my arm. Lightly. Cautiously. The touch of a woman who had not yet decided whether she was soothing a wound or opening one wider. I know what I said, she murmured. And I know what I made it sound like. I turned then. Her hand was still on my sleeve. My body, treacherous and immediate, reacted to the contact as if the argument had not happened. As if anger and wanting had not become, at some deeply inconvenient point, nearly indistinguishable. Gabi saw it. Of course she did. She should have taken her hand away. Instead she said, so quietly I almost missed it, I hate how much of you belongs to the room. That did it. Not because it was rational. Because it was honest. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. And I hate, I said, how quickly you run every time you see that I'm real. Her fingers tightened. The air between us changed. There is a point in a fight where two people stop defending themselves and start telling the truth in the language of touch. We crossed into it like a fall. Gabi kissed me first. Not gently. Not carefully. Not like Brooklyn. This kiss had anger in it. Hunger. A week of distance and misreading and jealousy, and the humiliating knowledge that both of us had been keeping score in wounds. I took her face in both hands and kissed her back hard enough to feel the wall at her back shake when she hit it. Somewhere under my anger was relief. Terrible, useless relief. Because she was here. Because she was kissing me like the last week had hurt her too. Because for all her caution, for all my control, this had finally become ugly enough to be real. Her hands found the lapels of my jacket and pulled me closer. Mine slid down to her waist, then lower, then back up again because every nerve in my body had become a single directive and none of it had anything to do with restraint. When I kissed the corner of her mouth, she made a sound low in her throat that nearly ended whatever remained of reason. Taylor, she breathed against my cheek. It did not sound like warning. Good. Because I had none left for either of us. I kissed her again, deeper this time, and felt the exact moment her body gave up pretending this was still a conversation. She arched into me with a kind of furious need that made my pulse turn violent. My hand slid under the line of her jacket, over silk, then warmer than that, and Gabi's fingers dug into my shoulder hard enough to hurt. Wonderful. The wall behind her, the city outside, the museum around us, all of it blurred into irrelevance. There was just her mouth, her breath, the shape of her under my hands, the fact that she was kissing me like she might rather lose than walk away one more time. I should have remembered we were in a public building. I did remember. I simply stopped caring. Gabi pulled me closer by the back of my neck, and that small act of urgency did something catastrophic to my restraint. I kissed down the line of her jaw, felt her head tip back against the wall, felt her breathe my name like it had become a private problem. "You said you hated what I do to people," I murmured against her throat. Her laugh came out wrecked. "That's not what I said." No. No, her hand slid lower down my back. "I said I hated how much of you belongs to the room." I lifted my head just enough to look at her. "And what if none of this does?" That shook her. Good. Because I was shaking too. She stared at me for one long second, then kissed me again before I could decide whether the question had been brave or stupid. My hand found the inside line of her waist. Her nails traced once up my spine through silk. The world tilted. This was no longer controlled enough to be elegant. Thank God. I moved us away from the window and into the darker edge of the gallery, half hidden by a partition wall and a marble plinth holding a bronze figure none of us deserved to be judged by. Gabi followed with the kind of inevitability that makes a woman feel dangerous and doomed in equal measure. Her mouth was flushed by then. Her hair less perfect. My lipstick, I suspected, no longer qualified as intentional. I kissed her until I stopped thinking in sequences. Until my hands knew the line of her through fabric too well for a woman I had not yet had. Until her breath turned uneven enough to make every useful decision in me start losing structural integrity. When my hand slid under the silk at her side and found bare skin, Gabi gasped. Not loudly. Enough. It went through me like a lit wire. She caught my wrist at once, not stopping me, not yet, just holding there, her eyes lifting to mine with something almost furious in them. "Tell me," I said, voice low and rough, "if you want me to stop." Her grip tightened. She could have said yes. She could have said no. Instead, she kissed me again like an answer she wasn't ready to phrase. That was the problem. Because all at once I could see exactly where this was going. Not toward tenderness. Toward victory. Toward taking all the pain and jealousy and wounded pride of the last week and burning it down through contact until one of us mistook intensity for resolution. Gabi's hand slid under the edge of my jacket. My breath broke against her mouth. She felt it and almost smiled. That somehow made it worse. Because I knew what that smile meant. Not manipulation. Not exactly. Just the sharp, wounded knowledge that she could make me lose control too. And in that instant, everything became clear. I pulled back. Not far. Enough. Gabi stared at me, breathing hard, eyes dark, one hand still fisted in my jacket. For a second neither of us moved. Then she said, very quietly, "What are you doing?" I touched my forehead briefly to hers because it was either that or kiss her again and make the next 5 minutes impossible to recover from. Stopping. Her breath hitched with something like disbelief. Now. Yes. Her mouth parted. Why? I stepped back fully then. It nearly killed me. Because she looked wrecked. Because I was wrecked. Because every part of my body had already crossed the border and was deeply offended to be called home. But I knew. I knew. "No," I said, voice unsteady now in a way I hated and refused to hide. "Not like this." Gabi stood very still. I forced myself to hold her gaze. "Not while we're both trying to win." The words landed. Hard. I watched them do it. I watched the anger in her face shift into something more painful, more honest, more afraid. My hands were still shaking. "I don't want our first time to be this," I said, quieter now. "You trying to punish me for being who I am. Me trying to punish you for making me feel it." Silence. Real silence. Somewhere beyond the gallery, the string quartet was still committing crimes against subtlety. A waiter passed the opening at the far end without looking in. The museum kept pretending it was a room for civilization. Gabi's voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "I wasn't trying to win." "Yes," I said softly. "You were." Her face flinched. And then, because truth is rarely polite when it finally arrives, she said, Maybe I just needed to know I could undo you too. That one nearly took my knees. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true in exactly the place truth becomes mercy by accident. I closed my eyes for half a second. When I opened them again, Gabi looked like she regretted saying it and needed me to understand it all the same. I know, I said. She looked up sharply. I know, I repeated. And maybe I needed to know you could. A long, dangerous quiet stretched between us. Then Gabi laughed once under her breath, broken and bitter and beautiful in exactly the way no one should ever be in a museum. This is a disaster. I smiled despite myself. That's the first sensible thing either of us has said tonight. Her eyes went to my mouth, then away. This doesn't make me trust you more, she said. No, I adjusted the cuff of my jacket because my hands needed occupation and dignity was now largely decorative. It just means I trust us less when we're angry. That got a small, unwilling change in her expression. Not amusement. Recognition. I stepped back one more pace because it was the only move left that didn't end in catastrophe. Go back to the room, I said. Gabi's brows lifted faintly. And you? I'm going to stand here for 30 seconds and remember my last name. That almost pulled a laugh from her. Almost. Instead, she looked at me the way she had in Brooklyn. Only this time the tenderness was mixed with shame. Taylor. No, I kept my voice gentle. Don't fix it while we're both still bleeding. You'll only say something beautiful and I'll believe it too fast. That landed where it should have. Her throat moved once. Then, without asking permission, she stepped forward and kissed me. Briefly. Softly. Nothing like the last 10 minutes. It was worse. Because there was apology in it. And want. And the unbearable suggestion of what we might be when we stopped using fear as a weapon. When she pulled back, my restraint felt like an expensive injury. Good night, she said. That sounds tragic. It sounds unfinished. Yes, I said. That's because it is. She held my gaze for one long second and then walked out of the gallery, shoulders straight, mouth flushed. Every inch of her composed except for the fact that I knew exactly how hard she was breathing. I waited 40 seconds. Then 60. Then I went back into the room wearing my usual face and hating it for how easy it was to find. Naomi met me near the donor table 15 minutes later and took one look at me. She said. That expression is unhelpful. You stopped it. I looked at her sharply. How do you know that? Naomi took a sip of champagne. Because if you hadn't, you would look satisfied. You look bereaved. That was annoyingly accurate. We stood near a painting neither of us had any interest in while donors orbited in soft focus. She thinks I do this to everyone, I said. Naomi's face changed. Does she? No, I looked into my glass. She thinks I could. Naomi was quiet for a moment. That's not the same thing, she said. I know. And she isn't entirely wrong. Naomi set her glass down on the passing tray of a waiter who had not asked to be dragged into our emotional architecture. Taylor. I looked at her. She is allowed to be afraid of your power, Naomi said quietly. That doesn't mean you have to let her use that fear to deny your humanity. I exhaled. The room felt too bright. My skin felt too aware of itself. Somewhere across the main hall, Gabi was speaking to one of the trustees in a voice I could not hear and could not stop listening for. She said she needed to know she could undo me too. Naomi's brows lifted. And could she? Naomi asked. I looked toward the other side of the room. Toward the woman who had spent the last week running and returning, wounding and wanting, measuring me and failing as I had to stay away. Yes, I said. That's rather the issue. Naomi's expression softened in that dangerous way it only ever does when she has fully dropped the joke. Then maybe now you both know. The event ended badly in all the usual civilized ways. I shook hands, smiled for one photograph, told a donor his wife had excellent taste in foundations, which was both diplomatic and unprovable. I did not speak to Gabi again. She did not come to me. Good. Had she done so, I'm not entirely sure I would have remembered all the reasons I stopped. By the time I got home, the city had turned silver with rain. I stood in the dark of my apartment without taking off my shoes and thought about the gallery, about the way her hand had caught my wrist, about the way she had admitted, almost helplessly, that she needed to know she could undo me too. I thought about all the women I'd ever wanted, and all the women who had wanted me, and how none of that had prepared me for being understood badly by the one person whose understanding now mattered. That was the real injury, not the stopped desire, the misread heart. My phone buzzed on the entry table. A message from Gabi. No greeting. No preamble. You were right about one thing. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before answering. Only one? Brutal. Her reply came a moment later. I was acting like I was the only one at risk. I looked down at the screen, rain moving softly against the windows beyond the hall. Then another message. That doesn't mean I know what to do with you yet. I should have said something polished. Something gracious and knowing and emotionally superior. Instead, I typed the only answer that felt true enough not to make me hate myself later. That makes 2 of us. The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then. Good night, Taylor. I smiled despite everything. That still sounds tragic. This time she didn't answer. I stood there in silk and diamonds and museum ghosts and rain and the sharp, strange aftermath of having done the right thing at exactly the wrong moment. And for the first time in my life, restraint no longer felt like power. It felt like love in clothes I wouldn't have chosen. So tell me in the comments, what hit you hardest in part 4? Was it Gabi watching Taylor be Taylor with everyone in the room? Taylor finally saying she could bleed too? Or the moment Taylor stopped it because neither of them was loving? They were trying to win? And whose side are you on now, Taylor's, Gabi's, or both? If you want part 5, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss it, because the next part is where someone finally stops running, someone finally stops performing, and for once in this story, staying will mean more than wanting.